This house is for us, the family, to live in. Be grateful, won't you? Looking down at me, the mother-in-law said this, with a broad smile on her face. What an unreasonable person she is. After all, this house belongs to my mother. Despite the fact that my mother had just passed away due to illness, it bothers me that my mother-in-law happily talks about redecorating the house. The funeral hasn't even been held yet, and she just showed up without offering any condolences. Instead, the mother-in-law, ignoring my teary eyes, cheerfully talked about her dream of living here, just with my husband. It seems that for the mother-in-law, the only family is her son, and I am treated like an outsider. She waves her hand at me as if to shoo away an insect. I'm saying we're living here as a family. You don't think you, an in-law, not related by blood, would be treated as family, do you? My name is Candace. I'm 30 years old. I have an elder brother, 5 years my senior, whom I deeply respect. We have always been very close, and he has always been there to advise me on anything. When I was in elementary school and had troubles with friends, he would go to those friends himself and ask them to get along with me, because I was struggling. He was a bit meddlesome, but a very dependable brother who cared about his sister. During my rebellious teenager years in middle and high school, although my brother was often harsh with our parents, he always treated me kindly. He was always there to help me out. Regardless of what other adults say, I will always be on your side, Candace. I even felt jealous of him at times for being able to say such things so easily. When our father passed away from cancer during my college years, my brother, who had been a bit wild in the past, reflected on his past and said, I really owe a lot to our parents and teachers. They always thought about me and scolded me because they cared. I had never seen my brother talk much about the past, so I was a bit surprised, and at the same time I aspired to become a teacher who could be as respected as our parents. This experience inspired me to want to help children grow and assist those who are struggling, leading me to pursue a career in teaching. While others were focusing on job hunting, I was solely devoted to studying for the teacher recruitment exam. I remember the surprised look on my brother's face when I passed the exam and told him and our mother, Congratulations, I never thought you'd become a teacher. Keep it up. He said that, supporting me. I became the teacher I had aspired to be, but the reality was not as sweet as I had imagined. I was constantly busy with lesson preparations and dealing with student guidance, and over time became a part of my daily routine. With remote work becoming more common, there was no such option for teachers, and I had to commute on crowded trains every day. I also had to work on weekends and public holidays due to extracurricular activities. Moreover, as I started living alone upon becoming a working adult, I realized how hard it was to manage everything by myself. I remember how physically and mentally tough my first year as a working adult was. However, I still found fulfillment in my job as a teacher. As I got used to the busy days of a teacher's life, I started to question my mother's actions and words. There were times when our conversations over the phone did not go well, or she would forget something we had just discussed. When I became worried and went to check on her, I found trash scattered around the house. My mother, who was usually meticulous, couldn't explain why it had become like this, saying things like, I forgot to take out the trash, or I thought I had cleaned up. I discussed this with my brother and we decided to take her to the hospital. The diagnosis we received there was shocking: dementia. The doctor told us it was just the beginning stages of mild dementia, which started to manifest more as our father passed away and she spoke less often. As my mother's condition prompted more frequent communication with my brother, I also started returning home more often. On days when I visited home, my brother and I would discuss future plans. I met Kevin through a friend when I was busy with work and home responsibilities. At a time when I had no spare time to enjoy my private life, my friend took me out for drinks and introduced me to Kevin. Kevin worked for a multinational company. As a French teacher with a strong interest in foreign cultures, I found Kevin's stories about his work connections abroad fascinating. He was very sincere and always put me first. Despite my busy schedule, the times I spent with Kevin were very happy. Even going out for a meal when we had some time helped relieve my fatigue. As I grew more attracted to Kevin, 2 years into our relationship, he reserved a private room in a restaurant in New York City. It wasn't a special day, but he handed me a ring. "I want to make you happy, Candace. Will you marry me?" Kevin proposed to me, and I couldn't respond immediately. It was because of my mother. The care she would need was going to become more challenging. Although I had discussed my mother's condition with Kevin, I didn't want to involve him in it. However, Kevin said, "If you're worried about your mom, it's okay. I want to support her with you, Candace." Tears flowed at his words, and I remember how hard it was to simply say yes. I was 27 when I married Kevin. Kevin and I had discussed this beforehand, and after discussing it with my brother, we decided to build a duplex to live with my mother as I got married. Since then, the mother-in-law started contacting me more frequently. Before we got married, our interaction had been minimal, limited to introductory meetings and formal gatherings. Back then, it seemed she wasn't very interested in me. There must be a reason why she started contacting me so frequently. That's what I thought. As expected, her calls were about the new house we were building. "I heard you're building a new house, but what will the layout be like? I'm curious about the house my son will live in. Won't you show me?" she asked. Then she would say things like, "A spacious kitchen is better. The staircase should be here, not there. Let's make the room next to the living room on the first floor a guest room. Underfloor heating is essential. It gets quite cold in this area," and so on, giving unsolicited advice about the layout. I was annoyed by the mother-in-law's interference, since she had no plans to live with us, but I wanted to avoid conflict, so I casually handled it while having Kevin mediate. However, the mother-in-law persisted in contacting me directly. It made me anxious, thinking there might be an ulterior motive, so I consulted with Kevin. "Your mother keeps acting like she's going to live in the house herself. I'm getting anxious because even though we try to talk through you, she keeps contacting me directly. I'm really struggling with how to handle it lately." "Yeah, there seems to be something fishy about that. Alright, from now on, I'll handle anything that comes up, so Candace, you can completely ignore my mother's calls." "Won't it look bad if I ignore her?" "No worries, my mother is clearly being unreasonable. I'll talk to her again. But knowing her, she might still try to contact you. When that happens, feel free not to answer her calls." With Kevin's support, I began to ignore the mother-in-law's calls. We decided on the layout of our home and started building our new house. We planned to move into the new house in 6 months, and by that time the contacts from the mother-in-law had almost ceased. Kevin seems to have told her the expected completion date, but there was no particular response afterward. Then 6 months later, our home was finally completed. On the first floor, there is a living room a kitchen and a spacious room for my mother, while the second floor contains a shared space for us as a couple and our individual rooms. However, by the time the house was completed, my mother's condition had gradually worsened. Since we were both working, we couldn't be with her during the day and often came home to find the house significantly dirtied. A doctor had warned us that taking away her daily tasks could lead to a sudden worsening of her symptoms, so we left her to manage her personal care during the day. Yet she was subtly unable to do things she could do before. She could cook, but would leave the frying pan on the burner indefinitely. She would run the washing machine without adding detergent, or sometimes at 3 times the normal amount, creating a mess of bubbles. Despite the newspaper she had finished reading being right in front of her, she would complain all evening that the newspaper hadn't come. Listing all the difficulties would be endless. Her illness was truly straining for us. I consulted with my brother and decided to enroll our mother in a daycare service during the day. Initially, my mother was confused by the unfamiliar place, but having someone to talk to during the day seemed to brighten her mood. She started sharing with me about the craft art she did or the performances she saw at the local community center when I came home from work. Just when we thought we were getting used to this new life and her condition was stabilizing, it didn't last long. Just 2 years later, she caught what seemed to be an off-season cold, which turned into pneumonia. She never recovered and passed away. Dealing with dementia had drained her of her vitality, and she often couldn't eat the meals provided, weakening her physical strength and resistance. I was devastated and struggled to get back on my feet. Yet, there were numerous tasks to handle, contacting the city office, relatives, and the funeral home, none of which would wait. Just as I was preparing for the funeral, the mother-in-law arrived, laden with heavy bags. Thinking she came to help with the funeral, I greeted her. "Thank you for coming to help with my mother's funeral during this busy time. Please come in." But as soon as the mother-in-law entered the house, she blurted out something unexpected. "I will be living in this house." Shocked by her words, I stood frozen. Before I could respond, she continued, "If you don't like it, you can leave. I will live here with Kevin." Ignoring my confusion, she went on without any condolences. "I've been waiting 2 years for this. Finally, I can live here. How about it? Did you make the layout like I asked?" She started looking around the house. At that moment, I realized why the mother-in-law had started contacting us so frequently before the house was built. She probably assumed from the beginning that she would live in the house we were building. That's why she tried to have the layout adjusted to her liking, and perhaps that's why she kept contacting me, thinking I would be more compliant than Kevin. Hearing of my mother's death, she must have rushed over. Noticing her intentions, Kevin, turning pale, said, "Mom, don't you know? Didn't I tell you? The house isn't in my name, but in Candace's mother's." "What?" "Moreover, now that she has passed away, the inheritance goes to Candace's brother." "What are you talking about?" She glared at me and said, "Normally the house would be in the husband's name. Kevin earns more than you, and you couldn't afford this house mortgage on your own salary. You must have been relying on Kevin's income to pay the mortgage. It's practically Kevin's house. What an unreasonable daughter-in-law and mother you are, right, Kevin?" Attempting to explain to his mother, Kevin began. "No, Mom, well, let me explain." I cut him off, saying, "Kevin, it's okay, I'll explain." The mother-in-law shifted her glare from Kevin back to me, challenging me with a combative tone. "What are you going to say?" The mortgage for this house is being paid by my brother and me. The portion I'm responsible for comes from my own earnings, and we've never used Kevin's income. Kevin, is that true? Yes, that's right. I continued. We decided when building this house that it would eventually be handed over to my brother. Now that our mother has passed, the house will be lived in by my brother and his wife with his in-laws. The mother-in-law, her mouth agape, listened but clearly dissatisfied, protested. I won't allow it. If you were living and caring for your parents, it's only natural that I live with you next. I've been waiting for this. This is so unfair. I know a lawyer. I will consult with them about renouncing the inheritance. Of course, we had no intention of doing such a thing, but the mother-in-law was agitated. My brother will be here soon. Perhaps we should discuss this again when he's present. Yes, let me do that. I'll give your brother a piece of my mind and make him renounce it. When I speak up, I do so clearly. My opinion won't change, even when your brother arrives. The mother-in-law sat in the living room until the brother arrived. Kevin, although perplexed, kept apologizing to me. It's okay, she doesn't seem convinced by me alone, so let's talk with her again when my brother arrives. During that time, the mother-in-law was apparently making calls to her acquaintance, who was a lawyer. About the renunciation of the inheritance, yes, I think the person will agree. All right. When things move forward, please prepare the documents, and I'll count on your assistance then. The mother-in-law nodded over the phone. An hour later, the sound of a car stopping was heard outside. My brother had arrived. Mother, my brother has arrived. As I called out, the mother-in-law stood up, as if she had been waiting for this moment, and said, I will have Kevin give me this house, and then I will live here. She then headed towards the living room door. Just then, the living room door opened and my brother walked in. The mother-in-law took a deep breath to yell, opened her mouth, but at that moment no sound came out. She widened her eyes and collapsed to the floor. In fact, my brother looks quite intimidating. Some might suspect him of being involved in shady business due to his appearance. My brother's hobby is surfing. Additionally, because his job involves being outdoors all year round, his skin is deeply tanned and his hair is damaged by the sun. He keeps his hair shaved because it's too much trouble to style. He's also tall and muscular, with a noticeable scar on his forehead. The scar, which he got from a fall in elementary school, makes everyone think it's from a blade because of his intimidating appearance. Seeing my brother like this, the mother-in-law seemed to lose all her energy and collapsed right there. Are you the one who had something to say about this house? My brother glared at the mother-in-law and asked politely. Well, I thought that after your mother passed away, I would live in this house. But I just heard that you will be living here, and I knew nothing about it. Did Candace tell you that you would live here? We thoroughly discussed what would happen with this house before building it, so that seems unlikely. As my brother spoke more sternly, the mother-in-law said with a clearly pained expression and eyes cast down, No, it seems I misunderstood. I was involved in discussing the layout with Candace before the house was built, so I thought I had some right to live here. A right to live here? Does that mean you provided any support to my sister? No, that's not the case. So, without bearing any burden or making any promises, you thought you had a right to live here, just because you gave opinions about the layout? Yes, I'm sorry, it was my misunderstanding. Initially, my brother looked at me suspiciously, but he seemed exasperated by the mother-in-law's reasoning. However, to her, my brother probably appeared angry, and she apologized repeatedly, more humbly than I had ever seen. I don't recall any discussions about you living with my sister and her husband after our mother passed away. Candace, That's right, isn't it? Of course, I've never detailed the house situation to my mother-in-law. I only told her it was a house for living with my mother. As I responded to my brother's question, the mother-in-law covered her face with both hands. I thought this house was in my son Kevin's name. I assumed that after the daughter-in-law took care of her mother, it would be normal for me to live with them next. But it's tough living while caring for an unrelated elderly woman with dementia, so I was waiting until your mother passed away. I heard from my son about her passing, and I assumed it was finally my turn, so I already vacated my apartment. I have nowhere to go. It's reckless to act without any promise. Anyway, this house will be for me and my wife once my sister and her husband move out. I'm sorry, but I have no intention of living with a complete stranger who lacks common sense, so please leave. The mother-in-law might have been trying to be humble, but her disdain for our mother was evident in her words. While my brother refrained from shouting at her, given that she was technically the mother-in-law, his voice grew colder and lower as his anger built. The mother-in-law looked at us pleadingly, so we reiterated our decision to leave. Actually, Kevin and I will soon be moving abroad due to his job. That's right, I work for a multinational company, right? I've mentioned that we might move abroad eventually. We knew we would be going abroad at some point, so we wanted to care for my mother until then. Kevin also agreed that was best. Unfortunately, since my mother has passed away, we will keep our original promise and have my brother and his wife live here. That's... Seeing the mother-in-law's dejected look, I exchanged glances with Kevin. Then sighing, I spoke up. If you already vacated your apartment and have nowhere to live, would you like to come abroad with us? I offered this, knowing she would refuse, as she has a fear of flying. You know I have a fear of flying, right? I've never even had a passport. But if you have nowhere to live, you need to find somewhere. Kevin looked slightly worried. Either way, applying for a passport now would take time, and arranging to live abroad won't be feasible on such short notice. We're leaving the country soon anyway, so it's impossible either way. The mother-in-law's previous bravado had vanished, and she appeared downcast. Kevin, feeling a bit sorry for her, made a suggestion. I'll call Tad. Wait, I can't live with Tad, so don't call him. Ted is Kevin's brother. Despite her eagerness to live in our house, she insisted she couldn't live with Kevin's brother, Ted. But you have no place to live, so what choice do you have? Unable to argue with Kevin's statement, the mother-in-law hung her head, but suddenly looked up. Then just give me some money. I absolutely refuse to live with such a daughter-in-law. As she shouted this, Kevin sighed in exasperation and began to make a call. The mother-in-law tried to snatch the phone while shrieking, but as soon as the call connected, she quickly backed off. It seems Ted's wife was coming to pick up the mother-in-law. We decided to let that side of the family handle it and hurried to continue with funeral arrangements and other necessary discussions with my brother. After finishing the conversation with my brother and returning to the living room, the mother-in-law sat silently in a chair. She clearly disliked the idea of going to Ted's house. We were just about to prepare for the funeral. There seems to be some time left, so why don't we start getting ready? Kevin suggested this, and my brother and I agreed, checking what was needed together. An hour later, the doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, Ted's wife was there. Hello. She had an unusual appearance, to say the least, dressed flamboyantly. That day she was wearing a top with a deep neckline extending from her collarbone to her chest. She was the type to speak her mind clearly. She may seem carefree due to her appearance, but she dislikes things that don't make sense and is straightforward and nice. I think she and my brother would get along. The mother-in-law has a hard time dealing with this daughter-in-law. My condolences on your loss. I was in a hurry, so please excuse my appearance. She apologized politely, which caught me off guard a bit. However, as I led Ted's wife into the living room and she saw the mother-in-law, her demeanor changed. "Oh, come on, Mother, give it a rest. Don't trouble my sister-in-law and her family. Come on, let's go home," she said, making the mother-in-law stand up. "I had been suggesting you live with us from the start. You should have just agreed, but there's nothing as difficult as the pride of the elderly. Well, I'll take her home now. Sorry for the disturbance." She apologized quickly and whisked the mother-in-law away like a storm. My brother and his wife have been suggesting she live with them for a while now. Despite her looks, his wife is very caring and she promised to take good care of her when they got married. But my mom didn't want to live with a daughter-in-law like her and kept refusing, preferring to live alone. She's quite a character, Kevin said with a laugh. "She's essentially a good person and Ted is responsible, so I think my mom will manage just fine with them." True to Kevin's expectations, the mother-in-law is now living safely with the brother-in-law and his wife. However, she can't live as freely as she did on her own due to the presence of the daughter-in-law and has become more subdued. That kind of life is good for her. Despite all her complaints, she doesn't seem to have any intention of working and living alone, Kevin said, almost in disbelief with a laugh. "The house we built is now being lived in by my brother and his wife as planned. Recently, the wife's parents also moved in, and they live together in a multi-generational setting. As agreed, the mortgage is now being paid by my brother and his wife's parents. Meanwhile, I'm in Paris, France." This is where Kevin was assigned for his overseas work. Of course, I was nervous at first, but being proficient in French has allowed me to communicate without any issues. Leveraging my experience as a French teacher in the US, I have become a teacher at a school teaching English. Unlike in the US, the working hours here are not as long, and I always get weekends off, allowing for more time with Kevin and providing daily stimulation in a different environment while leading a fulfilling life with more ease.